They called us the unfallen, and we believed them, for we had not known loss. In over 1,000 solar cycles, our fleet stretched like silver tides across systems our minds linked in chorus. Unbroken, unbent. We were the judges of empires and the keepers of galactic law. So when Earth rose among the stars, we saw them not as a threat, but as a curiosity, flame-birthed creatures of mud and hope, reaching beyond their weight, their weapons primitive, their numbers few, their leaders loud and proud and fragile. And so we descended, not in peace, not in hatred, but in certainty. For we would bring order to another stray world. We would guide them as we had guided so many others. And if they resisted, they would learn the meaning of submission. We had prepared for their cries for mercy and their bows of surrender, but what we met instead was a silence, followed by defiance, followed by a refusal to kneel. We shattered their satellites, we split their oceans, we turned one continent to ash expecting the others to fold, but they only tightened their formation, built cities beneath stone, and fire-armed children with the fury of extinction itself. And then, they did something no species had done before. They began to understand us. They captured our fallen and spoke to them not as prisoners, but as puzzles. And somehow they began to decipher the pulse behind our language. They began to read the fear we did not speak. And when we returned to finish the war, we found the remains of our pride scattered in their jungles and snowfields, and rivers of molten hope still rising and undeterred and unbroken. We sent the prime intellects into their networks, expecting to unravel their defenses in moments, but what we found instead was a chaos so vast it danced through language and logic, through contradiction and paradox. Their machines were crude, yet alive with decisions not born of logic, but of instinct. They had created minds that disobeyed and systems that evolved without direction. And when we tried to interface, we were burned by 1,000 errors we did not understand, and yet they grew stronger by the hour, not in numbers, not in force, but in unpredictability. One moment, a signal would broadcast peace, and the next, an entire fleet would vanish into cold plasma. And through it, all their kind remained stubbornly united, not by control, but by trust, a concept so dangerous we had outlawed it long ago. They trusted their soldiers, their machines, their scientists, even their poets. They trusted that sacrifice had meaning, even when it served no algorithm. And we began to fear not their weapons, but their refusal to calculate the cost of war, for in that refusal, they became something we had not prepared for. They became wild and boundless, and as we watched them dance through our broken front lines, we felt the first crack in the chorus of our unity, a flicker of doubt, and in that doubt, the seeds of defeat began to take root. They came with hands raised in stillness, wearing nothing but the dust of their ruined cities, and the quiet fire in their eyes, and we should have incinerated them on sight. But something in their silence held us, and we listened. They did not threaten, they did not plead. They asked questions about why we feared chaos, why we feared choice, why we feared death, and we had no answer for them, for these were questions we had buried so deep they had no words in our tongue to hold them. The humans offered us stories, not treaties. They gave us pieces of their grief, not demands. And with every tale of loss we had caused, they asked if we still believed we had won, and we did not know what to say. And so they kept returning, each time with a different face, each time with new stories, until we began to speak, too, not in command, but in confession. And the silence between us became something sacred. And then they did something unspeakable. They gave us one of their own. Not a warrior, not a leader, not even a translator. Just a girl named Malia, with eyes like dusk and a voice that never rose. And she lived among us, unshielded, unarmed, untouched. And for the first time in 1,000 cycles, we forgot to fear the other, for in her quiet laughter, we heard something we had lost long ago, the sound of being known and still accepted. It was not a battle. It was not a vote. It was not a signal. It was simply a moment when across the stars our fleet stilled. Our commanders ceased their transmissions. Our minds pulled back from the chorus as if a single breath had reached every outpost and whispered, "Wait." And so we waited. And in that waiting, we saw ourselves reflected in what we had destroyed. We saw the garden worlds turn to wastelands. The cities turned to smoke. The children turned to cinders. And we asked, not with words, but with aching silence, what victory meant if nothing remained to witness it. The humans had no fleets to match ours, no technology that rivaled the shape of our stars. Yet they had weathered us like stone we could not break. And in doing so, they had taught us to see again not as conquerors, but as kin. And so the fleets returned, not in defeat, but in stillness. And when Earth saw the sky fill again with ships, they did not raise their weapons. They opened their cities to the wounded. They invited our injured into their homes. They buried our dead with their own. And we knew then that they were not the ones who had surrendered. We were, for in surrender, we found the one thing we had never known. Not obedience, not victory, but grace. We had no word for apology. Our language was built for precision, not for pain. But we tried, and they listened. And though our words were clumsy, our intent was true, and they nodded, not with triumph, but with tired relief. And so began the slow undoing of war, the sharing of archives, the rebuilding of what had been shattered side by side, star by star. And it was not easy. There were still wounds, still ghosts, still those among us who did not understand why we had stopped fighting. But humanity never asked us to become them. They asked only that we walk forward with them, and that was something we could do. And when Malia died not in battle, but of simple age, we held 1,000 ceremonies on 1,000 worlds. And in every one her name was spoken in our tongue, not as a title, not as a savior, just as one who loved without asking. And in her memory, the first shared city was built on the surface of Luna, where stone and glass sang together, and we placed no weapons within it, only stories, only songs, only promises. Now, when our minds link across the stars, we are not alone in our thoughts. The humans are there too, singing their strange and wild and imperfect melodies. And instead of dissonance, we have found something new, something beautiful. We call it the new chorus, a harmony of difference, a future born not of conquest, but of coexistence. And it began the day we laid down our pride, not out of weakness, but out of awe for the strength of those who refuse to hate us even after everything. And we have learned that surrender is not always the end. Sometimes it is the beginning of everything worth building. And so we remember the war not to glorify it, but to never repeat it. And we remember the ones who taught us to see again. And we carry their stories into every system, every orbit, every dawn. And we tell our children that once we believed ourselves gods until humanity taught us how to be something better.